Woof woof! Hey guys, it's me Marcus, aka the Mad Dog, and we're back with another video. Written by Tom Taylor and illustrated primarily by Bruno Redondo, the first issue in this run of Nightwing was issue 78 that was published by DC Comics in March of 2021, with the story concluding in issue 118 that was released in October of 2024. And Dick Grayson is back. With Rick now an anomaly in his past, Nightwing is desperate to reclaim the streets of Bludhaven, and when a sizeable fortune drops into his lap, the possibilities are endless. But when Dick himself is thrown into the limelight, can he survive when both of his lives are pushed directly into the crosshairs of Bludhaven's most dangerous criminals? Hey you! Yeah, you silly! I got a question for you. Did you know Dick Grayson is just a really great guy? Now, the way you answered that question tells me if you've already read the first issue of this run or not, because I swear that was the only thing Tom Taylor wanted you to know. In many ways, I can't blame Taylor for taking that approach because Nightwing was in desperate need of a different direction going into this. The whole Rick Grayson debacle had been a smear on a fan favourite character's legacy for over a year before this. And what's a more surefire bet than going back to what worked best? It's just that I wish it would have been a little less obnoxious about it, especially in this first issue, because the opening scene is a young Dick Grayson jumping in to fight some guy named Shelton Lyle, a pompous rich kid with the most punchable face. I'm really glad he's just in this series for a flashback, who was bullying two kids in the park, with the goal to say he'd get away with it as his family owns the police. Except that one of these kids getting attacked is Barbara Gordon. Jim takes a young Grayson back to Wayne Manor, where Alfred tells him he's proud of him for being a hero even without a mask. And honestly, this was where I knew this story had its priorities right. Dick Grayson is good enough. There's no need for gimmicks, amnesia, or a hardcore reinvention. And let's be honest, if you really wanted hardcore Dick, that would be easier to find than a recent Great Nightwing story. But by going back to the basics from the very first page, it reminds us that the charismatic former circus performer with a heart of gold is all you need to start with. And trust me, if you didn't know he was that by the time we're back in the present, even though he's low on cash and a landlord, Dick Grayson's such a nice guy that he even refuses to think about raising anyone's rent. And if that wasn't enough, as a Nightwing, he saves and adopts a three-legged puppy that was being beaten by a gang. Like, come on, how much more lovable does a guy need to be? As on the nose as it is, this works great for the opening issue because it adds something this book needed from the announcement. Stakes. After Rick, there's no way they could do anything super drastic to Dick, so the sense of tension was, ironically, a bit up in the air. Yet Bitewing, as he's creatively called, was the emotional tug that this book needed to make it feel like it wasn't just going through the motions. I made a promise to myself, if anything happened to that dog, I'd quit the book. There's a scene early on when some kids, Robin, and the dog are stranded on a pier, and honestly, I thought people would turn up quicker if you mentioned the dog instead of a bunch of kids. Maybe that's just me. And in my eyes, a great Nightwing story has to approach the character from three angles, and Taylor did a good job of attaching a storyline to each. I'm not going to go all Freudian with it, but I labelled them as the hero, the man, and the heart. The whole thing with Bitewing, that's all heart. It's the stuff Dick does for himself and not what he tries to present to anyone else. The hero side is kind of obvious, it's the vigilanteism, and the main way that Tom brings this out is with a clear set of villains, because Blockbuster and other criminals within Bludhaven have renewed power in the city from when Dick was gone. With Commissioner McLean in his pocket and having just crushed the former mayor's skull, Melinda, the next in line for the role, is ready to take over Bludhaven and do Blockbuster's bidding. Don't get me wrong, it feels very cliche to have the mayor and police commissioner working with the main villain, but gets some brownie points for not feigning a mystery around it. We knew this was a deal even before she was sworn in. Blockbuster was a fun counter to her as well, even if I've got to admit that the only note that I made on him in the early issues was, is he just the kingpin with hair? He was the muscle, the intimidator, and reminded me a lot of Mr. X from Resident Evil 2 with how he can just charge through walls. There was a great scene in one of these early issues where he confronts Nightwing, and Dick recognised he needed to retreat because it was a fight he couldn't win. So you know what, if someone had to rise up from the mess of the Dick Grayson era, I'm okay with it being him. And that's why I think this works so well, because it doesn't shy away from the fact that Dick Grayson happened, or the impact that would have on Bludhaven. You don't get the sense that Nightwing's being punished for it, but it's not as if the whole thing had zero ramifications. The dumbassity of that time even gets made fun of in this series, but there's not that feeling that Taylor feels burdened to apologise or carry it on. Yep, it's not in the same boat as Nick Spencer's Spider-Man run, and that sentiment continues when Dick inherits a fortune through Alfred's will. I'd had the misfortune of Tom King's Batman being fresh in my mind, so I remembered why exactly Alfred wasn't in the picture, but this was a great way of acknowledging that death, giving Dick a storyline connected to it, but not feeling like you're left in the dark if you hadn't read it. And that's what comics should be. Little nods if you've been following the whole time, but a great jumping on point for anyone who wants to start. The only problem with that is that Taylor seemed to struggle with Dick's voice. It's too matter of fact and lacks the cocky charm he's known for. There weren't many instances where he had a wisecrack, and I felt it took something away from these opening stories. Again, it felt like it was because Taylor was too focused on this nice guy image. Nice guys don't answer back. Nice guys are the ones who chase after a group of homeless kids who stole his wallet just to say, nah, actually it's cool, I don't need it. Like, come on Dick, you knew that they were homeless from the second that you saw them. And why I think this problem exists is because of the final state of Grayson, the man. And this is the image that he wants to project out into the world. It's the philanthropy, and the things he does as Dick rather than Nightwing. And the problem with the voice, to me, seems to be because Taylor was so adamant in the opening issues to just show the man, rather than remember that the heart is there. And this fully carried into the narration as well. I don't want to say that the book would have been better off without it, as it did help when introducing certain characters, but there were times when the art was doing enough to show us what's happening, but we still end up with boxes like, oh no, and damn it. If it was once or twice, it wouldn't bother me, but combine that with the fact they didn't feel like the same Nightwing that we got in Conversations, and it took away from the story when it could have bolstered everything up. That may also be because I wanted to take in every line of Bruno Redondo's art that I could, so the less boxes, the better. I'm disappointed in myself for not seeing him work on a title before, because what a breath of fresh air this style is. It's bold, vibrant, clean, yet detailed, and one of the best things about this run. I'm glad he wasn't just on this for the opening arc, because there was so much experimentation going on throughout with the paneling, structuring, and even the way that the story was presented. Wait, are those three the same thing? One page could look perfectly normal, then the next could mimic an instruction manual, or throw emojis into the mix, and I just never knew what it would try next. Especially because Taylor was going in a more traditional direction for both Dick's character and the story, this dynamic style was doing enough to keep the boat firmly pushed out. Although, it was really reminding me of another title, but I can't think which one. What stood out most was how well light and dark were balanced out. Dick is such a vibrant and bold character that it makes sense for him to have his scenes injected with so much colour, and for his face to be so emotive. Yet when we're introduced to Heartless, the shadows are used perfectly. This guy emerges from the alleyways of Bludhaven to very literally rip people's hearts out. And I say literally instead of actually because the device he uses seems to take the heart from the solar plexus rather than where the heart actually is. We don't get told much about him, but I liked his design. He's got this techno-punk look, a gun that looks straight out of Ratchet and Clank, and is doing whatever he can to get Nightwing's attention. With speaking about those three sides to Dick, Heartless finds a way to attack all of them. There's the obvious one of him attacking in a great fight scene where Tim Drake also got involved, but he also knows how to go after the man. Early on, Dick turns his attention to the massive amount of homeless people living within Bludhaven, especially to the younger people living in the camps, as he recognises that he was one of the few fortunate ones after his parents were murdered. So as Dick, he buys everyone pizza, and as Nightwing, he's quick to defend when Brutal and the Electrocutioner are hired by Blockbuster to crack down on the amount of thefts that he's not getting a cut from. This gives Heartless a chance to trap Nightwing, and sets fire to the homeless shelter that had been built and Dick had started to help out with, burning down the very thing that his heart was attached to. I can't lie, I don't have many complaints about Heartless as an introductory villain. He was mysterious, but at the same time it felt like he had a motive and a plan that we just hadn't been told. Yet at the same time he was direct, tenacious, and managed to get under Dick's no, that doesn't sound right. Nightwing's skin quickly. But the one thing I don't understand is if he was so intent on getting Dick's heart, why not just take it when he was unconscious for a good length of time after the fight? And it's a good job that Heartless was in the picture, because do you remember the mayor I said surprised me because they didn't make her being a villain a big twist? Well, the big twist with her is that she might not be a villain anyway. Her name is Melinda Zuko, the daughter of notorious crime boss Tony Zuko, who has also worked for the Maronis. Obviously, this strikes a nerve with Dick because they were the crime family responsible for killing his parents. And the next time we see Melinda is when she's being sworn in, with Blockbuster by his side the entire time. Her and Dick set the targets on one another, and Taylor didn't drag this out to pad issues. As soon as Nightwing had connected the dots, he went to her place and immediately confronted her. That didn't go to plan as he'd hoped, as he's ambushed and unmasked. But as luck would have it, Melinda had been looking for him, because although she may have been raised by the Maronis, her biological father is John Grayson. And you may be thinking the exact same thing I did when I first read this. Was his name always John? For as much of a cheap retcon as this may first feel, once we get the explanation, I thought it was quite a smart move from Taylor to find a way to immediately connect it to Dick, but also do it in a way that didn't stain the legacy of the Grayson name. The whole issue where Melinda's mother goes through the past wasn't as much of a drag as these type of stories can become, and it ended up being quite a somber, bittersweet story that almost cast Dick in a more fortunate light, even though he had to watch his father die. The switch up in art felt warranted too, and it had a flatter, less saturated look that gave it a greater sense of noir. And instead of the cliche who was working for the big bad narrative, it became will Melinda betray a biological family for the one that raised her, which I preferred. The stakes were already escalating as now Dick's closest connection to Blockbuster also knew his real identity, so the lines between the hero, the man and the heart were already starting to blur. This led into one of my favourite action scenes early on when Blockbuster brings the Bludhaven police right to Melinda's door, and it illustrates perfectly why he's such a formidable threat. Again, he's the kingpin with hair, but it's still fun to watch, and the entire time I couldn't help but wonder if Melinda was legit or had she set Dick up. So you know what? For an opening arc, this ticked all the boxes I wanted. It was fun, had a sense of whimsy, yet the tension was there when it needed to be. It made me ask a lot of questions about where this was going, and more than anything, it just wanted to be a good Nightwing story. It's trying to give him a clean enough restart after the convoluted and baffling mess that came before it, and it works. It doesn't reinvent the wheel because that's not what was needed, and I'm all for it. It just comes down to making us fall in love with the character again, and how can I talk about that without mentioning the phenomenal work that was done with the relationship between Babs and Dick? I spoke about the heart earlier and how the dog contributed to that, but Barbara is the linchpin in Dick's life. She is essential as Oracle, but Taylor did a great job of showing just how important she is to him as a man when the mask is off, or as his cushion when he just needs someone to take him away for a moment from the chaos of his life. This might be the best I've seen of her character since Gail Simone wrote a solo series, and it was in their scenes where I felt like Tom began to get more comfortable with Dick's voice and the charm seeped in, and it came at the best time as the wider Batman universe began to fold into the narrative more, and perhaps this is what Taylor needed from the beginning. With the Blockbuster story simmering in the background, more attention's put on Dick Grayson and how he wants to use the fortune left by Alfred. There's this suspense around a big reveal that, honestly, I kinda bought into as it was happening. I like seeing Nightwing ask Superman for advice and seek validation from the rest of the Bat family. It felt natural and added to the wonder of it all since Dick is usually so confident, and it was almost as if by having these other characters to bounce off against, Taylor found his Grayson. Yet by the end of it all, I found it hilarious because the whole thing is building up to Dick announcing the launch of the Alfred Pennyworth Foundation, a charitable cause that seeks to improve public housing, prisons, employment, and pretty much everything that will make Bludhaven less crime-ridden. And this was what Dick was unsure about doing. He really needed to call up Superman to know if this was a good idea. Really leaning in hard on the nice guy stereotype. But again, there's momentum. The run is finding its feet, which is why it's deeply disappointing that all of that had to be halted for Fear State. This was a crossover amongst the Bat family titles, and by that I mean that the main issues were in Batman, and every other book had to pause the stories for it. Scarecrow's trying to take over Gotham, which causes the city to fall under some oppressive military countermeasures, causing it to be this dystopian former shell of itself which Batman and the team have to stop. And again, these crossovers happen to get people to buy other titles, but reading Taylor's run without that event alongside it, it's an odd experience, because on one hand there are some important scenes with Dick and Barbara that are essential to know about for the rest of the run, but it's impossible to know what's going on without reading all of the estate, which requires you to have read all of Tinian's time on Batman. Again, on the surface it sounds like I'm complaining about comics being comics, and if this was the 90s or earlier I'd take it on the chin because it wasn't really a thing to follow one creator's run at that time. But now, creators yearn for a character defining run that they can put the stamp on, rather than just being one of a handful of titles coming out. I get that it was unlikely Taylor's choice to be part of the crossover, but the best books find a way to navigate the event without derailing their own title or making you feel clueless about what's happening. That did not happen here, and I didn't enjoy this storyline enough to look into it further. Maybe it is a fun storyline in Tinian's series, so I'll keep an open mind when I start reading that, but all I got here was questions. Who is Seer? Who is Simon Saint? Do I have to care? What is going on with Blockbuster and Bludhaven whilst Nightwing's in Gotham? Why was there a badass fight with Batman at the beginning that the rest of the arc couldn't live up to? What was the point of the cliffhanger with the tower blowing up in part 2 if the only follow-up we're gonna get is Cass and Steph going, yeah, we weren't really there? What was the point of going through the whole ordeal of getting the army's suits if they're just going to immediately be sussed out and ditch them off? Was it just for the jetpack? Am I really supposed to believe that there isn't some kind of bat jetpack in the cave? Why not just get the one Bruce used at the beginning of Tom King's run? Why was there no real ending to this? And the most important question, was I really supposed to be happy that this all just seemed to be set up for a Batgirl's book they've got no intention of reading? But it's not all doom and gloom, and the main thing I took away from this was Dick's lingering guilt over his parents' death and how well his relationship with Barbara had already developed. The former is just a small moment when Dick witnesses the watchtower blowing up and gets a flashback to his family falling on the day of the murder. It might seem minor whilst reading, but that fear of falling is something that grows as the run carries on, and it was interesting to see how early Taylor brought that in. With the relationship, I was glad that Babs and Dick were officially back together. There was a great flashback scene when she brought him out on patrol, which mirrored him helping her step back into the Batgirl role. And for as much as I enjoyed the will they won't they, it's quite poetic that only once the vigilantes again are they comfortable enough to acknowledge the feelings. And after Barbara thought she saw Dick die, but you know what, let's just pretend it's mostly the first thing. Honestly, this came at exactly the right time because they were so close to just being official in the first arc that it had to advance or it would risk getting stale. And honestly, I just like seeing these two together. I'm sorry Starfire shippers, yet every storyline has to move forward. And this first part of Taylor's run ends with two fantastic issues. First up's an annual, which I'm normally quite taken to leave it with. The whole thing revolves around Red Hood being framed for the murder of 3 FBI workers, and then Dick teams up with him to get to the bottom of it. Using all the lessons he'd learned during the formative years as a duo, they find the mystery assassin, and in my eyes, this is what an annual should be. If you did skip this, it wouldn't impact the main run in the slightest. But at the same time, this did so much to reinforce the ideology that makes Dick Grayson who he is, without needing to go over the top with the nice guy tropes. And similar to the Batgirl flashback I spoke about earlier, I was really enjoying how they gave us these select scenes between Dick and Jason from their history together. It really strengthened the idea that they are like brothers to one another. Grayson will always want to believe in the good in him and come to the rescue when need be. But I'll admit I'm not the best at understanding continuity, so does this take place before 3 Jokers, or is that set in an alternate universe now? I ain't complaining that none of that was brought up here, but if this is set after, then there was a really awkward conversation that needed to happen between these two. Yeah, issue 87 eclipses everything in this annual, and this single issue might be my favourite issue of any comic I've read in a good number of years. Again, the concept's simple, with the plot starting immediately, just like I was used to before the estate, because Blockbuster has set his sights on Dick Grayson, not Nightwing, but the man behind the mask. Barbara calls him once the hit is put out on Dick, and what follows is one of the most high-octane issues that unfolds entirely through double-page spreads. I have no idea how this managed to balance humour, action, emotion and story without ever using more than one panel and making sure that every page bled into the next to form one giant mosaic. I would love to see what this looks like with all the pages lined up besides one another, and how the story reads without page turns. But for me, it just highlights how in sync Taylor and Bruno were. The fact that there was never a moment where I didn't know where to look next, or which speech bubble followed which, is something that books going with a tried and tested formula can still mess up on. Beyond the spectacle of the design, everything I'd mentioned before, the positives and negatives, were all on display here. The fast pace played directly into a cocky Nightwing's favour, so that the voice felt right. The hero angle is front and centre with Nightwing and Batgirl running through the city after the bad guys. The man is affected because Dick is a target rather than Nightwing. That puts the images presented to Bludhaven at stake, and the heart is at the centre of this because Nightwing is kidnapped as an attempt to lure Dick out. And like I said at the beginning, if anything happened to that dog, I'd bow out of the series. But like with all great single issues, the story is wrapped up by the time the final page arrives. And this issue was so good that I went back to read it again right after I'd finished it, just to take in any details I'd missed whilst caught up in the pace. So all in all, what more could I want from a series than a fast pace, a great sense of humour, vibrant art, a central character with a ton of charisma but often doesn't get the spotlight, and a cute dog to rally behind. And that's exactly why I couldn't stop comparing this to Matt Fraction's Hawkeye. I know, in the past I've expressed how I didn't get the hype behind that series, and I have only read it the once just after it first came out, so who knows if my opinion on it would change on a reread, but it is odd that I was having such a great time with Taylor's Nightwing, whereas I had to drag myself over the finish line with Fraction's Hawkeye, a book that is very similar in design, and arguably gets spoken about in higher regard than the Nightwing title. But I remembered, it wasn't the introduction that turned me off from Hawkeye because I quite enjoyed that part. It was the series refusing to develop beyond what was shown in the beginning. The running joke of Bro, Pizza Dog, and a down on his luck Hawkeye could only feel new for so long. So for as much as I was enjoying the series, I couldn't shift the familiar feeling that this was all possibly just a honeymoon period. With the plotline of Dick Grayson being hunted immediately continuing in the next issue, it probably seems like a mistake to start part 2 here, and it probably won't be the only one I'll make in this video. Yet following the gauntlet of issue 87, there seems to be a shift in viewpoint for the series. Whereas the opening arcs were all about getting Dick back on his feet, this next phase is all about his role within the DC universe. I really wasn't expecting this either, as we continue the plot of Blockbuster wanting to take Dick out after he announced that he was going to clean up Bludhaven. The pace doesn't let up, and I was a fan of the switcheroo that meant being Nightwing was now safer for him than being Dick. Although I'm not sure how that's possible when he swings directly into his apartment in his vigilante getup. Like you'd think he'd be a bit more careful, the place just got attacked one issue earlier. Yet as part of that building on the image of the man, the assassination attempts won't stop Dick's plans, and he wants to use his public presence to discover who wants him dead. Although, I feel like it's pretty obvious. A group of superpowered mercenaries are hired to take him out during his speech, but when the first shot is taken, the Titans are there to intervene. There was a lot to enjoy here. It was great getting those scenes of Dick working within this team that he's so integral to, and seeing him step into the leader role, whereas his dynamic with Babs has primarily been following her plans. The only issue was that the voice problem went from one extreme to the other. Dick was speaking like his usual boisterous self, but so was every other male character. If there were no images, I wouldn't know whether it was Nightwing, Changeling, Flash or Cyborg that was speaking. However, I can let that slide if it means that the plot is as frantic as it was here. No time was wasted from the Titans learning about Blockbuster being behind the assassination to them immediately confronting him. It felt like Taylor really respected the reader's time, and although this could have been built into a far bigger moment, it also could have been dealt with head on like it was here, and narratively, it just made sense. And if this is just the first 2 parts to get Grayson, I can't imagine the whirlwind that I'm in. Wait. What's this crossover with John doing here? I want to start by saying I didn't mind this story, but talk about derailing your own hype. Was this mandated by DC? Because Taylor wrote both titles involved here, yet the timing is way off. It fits in the wider scope of things because it's another story that shows how important Dick is and always has been to the next generation of heroes. He's always been this great middleman, which was emphasised with the opening flashback with Batman. The plot starts when a former member of the Titans is killed. Due to the fact he was supposed to be invulnerable, it causes Dick and John to team up to get to the bottom of it. And honestly, this was the best I'd seen of older John. He was mature, felt like he was more comfortable carrying his father's legacy, but had that youthful optimism he had from when Tomasi and Gleason worked on him, and also pretty much had nothing from when Bendis ruined him. And for as much as the placement of the crossover confused me, this still felt more like a Nightwing story than a Superman one. But if there's one thing I wish could have been pushed to the side when these 2 characters collided, it's that fucking annoying boyfriend of John's. And I want to make one thing perfectly clear, I don't hate this guy because he's gay. I hate him because he's Jay. I hate his personality, I hate his jokes, I hate his hair, I hate the fact he complains about John's life being weird when you know he's Superman. So I want it under no illusion that my dislike of this character has anything to do with his sexuality. Especially in this video, I've spoke about Dick so much that I've got no leg to stand on if I was going to judge anyone for being gay. Some of my best dreams are gay. Wait, but honestly, this Jay was so irritating that he single-handedly stopped me reading John's series. And the most disappointing part about this is that he gives us the first of 2 Luther fake-outs. With John, it was just a little, albeit unfunny joke that he made, but one of the issues ends with the cliffhanger that LexCorp is behind Risk's death, only for the duo to never confront Lex or even go inside his building. So in the end, this is just a bizarrely timed yet light-hearted story that doesn't have much bearing over, well, anything. It's a shame too, because Dick Grayson had been the highlight of the run so far. Then this happened to bring an abrupt end to it, and now we're left with Dick Grayson? Wait, I'm not complaining, I just don't know what's going on. But you know what? This return was so fast paced that I didn't get much time to be confused. Blockbuster hires a mythic French assassin to take out Grayson, and only tells his circle 5 minutes in advance. Melinda does get the message across to Dick, but just as his apartment block is about to be attacked. This managed to once again hit all the angles of Dick Grayson. I loved how the first thing he did was pick up Haley. Sorry to pause the action folks, but I realised when I was editing this that my dumbass brain kept pronouncing this as Haley when it's actually Hallie, and I keep making that mistake throughout the entire video. Just add it to the list of things I can't pronounce. Then make sure everyone in the block had evacuated and even went back for his deaf neighbour. Although, with how ungrateful that guy was, I can see why no one else rushed in. This likely would have already been a great issue on its own, but when the Flash races into the picture, it's taken to the next level. We really got to see how Dick, with the help of his friends, makes a counter-attack, from allowing people to think he was killed, to staging Barbara's kidnapping so that they can get to the bottom of it. A large part of that is because we get so many plot lines that lean into how resourceful Dick is. Tim may be the smartest of the Robins, but Dick is still a great detective in his own right. There were hints of it when he teamed up with Red Hood, but it's so ingrained in the story now, and it's both a blessing and a curse because it turns out that Barbara was kidnapped by KG Beast, and we only learn this because Dick deduced where the device he was threatening to detonate had been planted. He also tracks down the French assassin, who is so deadly that he can't lay a hand on her, so he tricks her into stabbing the stab-proof part of his suit to reduce the distance. Then, knowing that Blockbuster will only send more of the world's best assassins after him, Dick uses the network he hacked to send out fake hits so that they can all be caught by his friends. It's that idea that we're being told a story where the characters are making the smartest choice, rather than just doing something to facilitate the plot. I spoke about it in part 1, but it was good having another example of Taylor acknowledging the past without feeling the need to apologise for it. This KG Beast appearance probably could have been dragged out far longer, but there's something quite natural about how he just shows up with no fanfare. He's just the guy behind a kidnapping, and at the same time Wally's so enraged at the sight of KG Beast that he's the one who delivers a beating, which I found to be touching, and it showed once again the impact Dick has on others, rather than going the standard route of giving him some kind of poetic revenge moment. I really enjoyed how well they worked together, and you can really feel the history between the two when they share a panel, but there was something about their dialogue when the outer suit that feels off. I couldn't put my finger on what exactly it was, but it just didn't feel like how real friends speak. Bit confusing considering how well the dialogue between Dick and Barbara was handled. And as DC Comics a company that exists within the DC universe now, their branding had cropped up a few times, and now I'm wondering if this had always been a thing. Yet it was after this that Taylor entered the series into what felt like an early endgame, and it didn't go as smoothly as I'd hoped. Battle for Bludhaven's heart starts with Dick opening Haven, one of his many developments for the city is part of the Alfred Pennyworth Foundation. It's a big success. Bruce shows up, the Flash is running security, John shows up to officiate the opening, and there's no sign of his irritating boyfriend. And even Blockbuster shows his face. Wait, Blockbuster? Yep, after his countless failed assassination attempts, he wants to look Dick in the eyes before he sets off his plan to take down everything he's been working for. When night falls, masked men try to burn the place to the ground, but when the disguises are pulled off, Nightwing recognises members of the police force. The next day, officers openly shoot at him, and Dick realises that there's no identity he can assume that is safe. At the same time, Heartless re-emerges and walks right up to Blockbuster's office with a proposal, which immediately causes a fight where a table's thrown at him and he falls from a window. Great job. Those two storylines exemplify exactly what I was feeling at this point. You had some parts of the run that felt dragged out, like the whole opening of Haven and the conspiracy behind it. This somehow felt longer than Dick Grayson, whereas so much happened in that. Occasionally there was an interesting idea thrown out here, like when Dick planned to fake his death to take away some of the heat, but that was so short-lived it might as well have not even been in the series. Then you've got storylines that somehow just become scenes, like the part with Heartless. Honestly, I'd forgotten he was even a factor in this since he disappeared for a while, but this as his return? Am I supposed to see him as a threat right now, or is he just a jobber for Blockbuster? There was another like this when Dick reveals he has recordings of the police attacking Bludhaven, which immediately gets leaked the second that Commissioner McLean shows up. I get it's following that logical approach that I praised earlier and showing how Dick has evolved from that brute force attitude in the flashback, but this happening so often meant that some interesting plot points were ended before they could hit the stride. It's odd as well because once McLean is outed, it feels like the story arc has ended. The battle for the heart of Bludhaven's been won, but there hadn't been much of a battle at all. Twitter did most of the legwork, but with his time up, McLean tries to flee, and we get a phenomenal chase scene that made me stop overanalyzing what the structure of this storyline is, and was a perfect example of action that advances the plot. There'd been a few issues where I questioned if the art was getting comfortable, as there was less experimenting and more guest artists were starting to show up. But this chase made me recognise how well Bruno emphasises weight. People falling off bikes or taking one of Dick's sticks to the head looks painful, without it ever stealing the limelight from the scene, whereas Nightwing himself displays his agility and looks weightless. Yet, despite all my compliments there, I realised after recording this section that it wasn't actually Redondo that was working on these issues. But look, it just means there's more than one great artist working on this. Melinda also got a chance to shine in this arc, and I enjoyed getting a deeper look into her double life. As Mayor, she needs to recruit McLean's replacement, but Blockbuster is still breathing down her neck. There was a lot to enjoy about this, and how she had to tiptoe around his suspicions, reminding me a lot of Splinter Cell Double Agent, but again, all of this great potential is squashed in the exact same issue, when Blockbuster overhears her talking to Dick. Like, could we not get a bit more build up? She'd only just came back into the story, and the last time we saw her was when she was revealing who she really is. A lot of the issues had the same rhythm, as the electrocutioner decides to attack Haven, which seems to be the go-to play now, where he just drives right up to the front gates, and when that plan is thwarted, that's it. And Blockbuster has a terrific fight against Nightwing, where Dick is beaten again and his true identity is revealed, and he's surprised that the young athletic dark-haired philanthropist that has been bothering him is the young athletic dark-haired vigilante that's been bothering him. Like, how well does that eye cover work? But holy shit, this could really change the direction of the entire series. Before, Nightwing was a safe cover whilst Dick was being targeted, but now there's no angle that Blockbuster couldn't attack from, except that in this very same issue, Heartless kills Blockbuster before anything even slightly interesting could have been done with this idea. Don't get me wrong, there was still a lot to enjoy. The fight between the two was enough to make this feel like a worthy conclusion, and with such a back and forth brawl, it would easily win ESPN's Fight of the Year. There was also a ton of self-aware moments, like when Dick was super corny with his speech to Barbara and she just laughs at him. But there were also some tone-deaf moments, like when the electrocutioner learns about all of Blockbuster's shady dealings in prison, and he says, "I had friends that died in that prison," to, I don't know, try and elicit some sympathy. And all I could think was, all your friends have been supervillains. Do you expect me to feel sorry for you? But for as much as I'd enjoyed pretty much all of what I've read so far, there was always something missing, whether it be committing to a voice for Dick, an inability to weave around larger events, or a propensity to end a story point before it had done anything. So with the main villain in the story now out of it, when we're barely at the halfway point, I couldn't help but struggle to see where this could go now. So for as much as this was becoming one of my favourite reads of this year, just like Dick should be well aware, things can't soar high forever, without eventually falling. For as much as I've tried to boil this run down into 3 variations of Dick Grayson, that's quite a limited view of the whole picture. The hero is built up of different roles like the vigilante, the sidekick and the teammate. The man is a collective for the good citizen and the public speaker, and the heart covers the boyfriend, the brother, all the introspective parts of himself. Yet regardless of how many ways I try to expand the net, I still don't know where Dick Grayson fits in, but the way this run had been handled so far, I didn't think I'd need to consider it. Besides the odd mention in a conversation, Taylor had made it clear that that was the past. At least until he appears again. But let's backtrack a bit, because prior to this reveal, everything seemed great, and as if there was nothing to worry about with Blockbuster being taken out of the picture so early. The story flows directly from that, as Dick wonders who may rise up to fill the void left in his demise. At the same time, the protection afforded to Boss Maroney's gone, but the police offer him a deal in exchange for his cooperation and bringing down the remaining operations. What follows is a really tense issue, with Maroney being escorted to witness protection. It did remind me a lot of the same setup with Harvey Dent in The Dark Knight, but you know what? It worked. I feel this could have played out a bit longer before the interception, but let's be honest, Who didn't think this was gonna happen? So why not just skip to that? I don't think it would have become more interesting if I had to watch them debate on whether or not to take the toll road. One thing I was really enjoying was how much Barbara was involved in the action, and not just staying behind a screen as Oracle. It's showing how essential she is to every aspect of Dick's life, especially Dick's Dick life, because I found it hilarious how she's just raring to go all the time, even when they're on the clock. Like, that's commitment. Those suits don't look like they're easy to take off. But with them out in the sticks and supposedly off the grid, a taxi pulling up outside startles them, even more so when the driver is the aforementioned Dick Grayson. Don't get me wrong, this gets points for shock value. It caught me off guard and it's bold, especially with Taylor acknowledging from the beginning that there was such resentment towards that storyline. Yet this could be Taylor truly putting the stamp on why that part of Dick's history isn't relevant, how it doesn't fit within any of these boxes that make up Nightwing, and oh, wait, it was a fake out. Nightmite, a 5th dimensional imp, is behind the illusion, and honestly, I don't know how I feel about that. I didn't want a Dick Grayson story prior to reading this, but it was such a strong move that I was intrigued with what Taylor could do with him. Yet this is where the run starts to veer in a bizarre direction, because it turns out that Blockbuster made a deal with the devil for greater intellect, which I can't imagine he got the full effect of since he thought that haircut was a good idea. In exchange, the devil Neron wanted a soul, and Blockbuster, being the charming, selfless guy that he is, sold the soul of Olivia, his firstborn child. Now, although this does feel like a complete left turn from the grounded crime syndicates we've been dealing with, one thing it does highlight is how polar opposite Dick was from his late foe, as you get the sense he'd sell his own soul to save someone else's. But with Blockbuster now dead, Neron wants to make good on his side of the deal, and it's coming after Olivia, an annoying kid that massively overstays a welcome. And again, I'm far from the biggest fan of kid characters, or kids in general. If this video does well enough, it may very well be the sponsor of my vasectomy, but she somehow becomes more important to this arc than any of the major villains for the entire series. And her personality is being a kid. That's it. There's nothing interesting or unique about her, despite the fact that her soul is desired by a devil, and I'd still rather Nightmite get more of the limelight. At least if Taylor is in this rhythm of one and done issues, I won't have to put up with her after this.
Foreshadowing is a narrative device.
In this story, she's more just the MacGuffin that needs saving, and there is a cute moment where Bitewing gets a chance to speak and be a hero, and yeah. I choked up a little bit, and honestly, I didn't dislike this issue that much when I first read it. I thought it was a bit off key was all, but for some reason this mystical route takes more and more of the focus. That in and of itself isn't the problem, it's just that during these storylines, Taylor seems to pause all of the great work he did by exploring the different angles of Nightwing. It almost reverts back to him just being a nice guy, and that's the only dimension to him. Speaking of dimensions though, I have to take some time to show love to the covers of this series. There had been an absolute streak of great ones, and just like the interior art, they can tell so much with such a simplistic design. Perhaps there is just one or two prominent colours, or the subject isn't obvious, or it's even trying to tell a full story right there on the cover. But I feel like this series should be the one exception where you can judge a book by its cover. We then get treated to another annual, which honestly, I thought this Olivia and Neron story should have been in the first place. I preferred the previous one more, as that focused on the story with Dick and Jason, whereas this gives us a handful of different side plots that add more to the world building. The one with Heartless, where we see his origins and how he was basically a more sadistic, messed up version of Bruce Wayne, was good, but it should have come much earlier in the series. Like, it shows a scene where a young Heartless is bullying Barbara Gordon, and it says his name's Shelton Lyle, and Dick's also there. Well, that's nice, I guess. I'm all for planting story threads early on and letting them play out later, but prior to Heartless killing Blockbuster, he'd just been a side villain with a badass design, so this connection to the opening was kinda just there. It was a fun aha moment and not on a take on me kind of sense, but just that I sort of remember that happening in the beginning, I guess. I didn't realise it would be the backbone of the run. Like, the narration tries to connect it to the helicopter accident that caused Lyle to need to take the hearts of others. And that's apparently in the same league as a young Dick knocking his teeth out. And I'm getting my tinfoil hat on because I reckon Taylor knew this wasn't that big of a payoff. So apparently, Lyle was also there on the day Dick's parents were killed, which inspired his morbid curiosity. And besides an offhand line in issue 100, the bullying thing seems to be the more important connection. Foreshadowing to me is a bit like fresh vegetables that if you leave it out for too long, I'm just gonna forget about it whilst I go for something more appetizing and then it'll go bad. Yet if we'd had this backstory way earlier, every time that Heartless had been lingering around would have had a far creepier presence. Don't get me wrong, I'm glad Taylor gave us this because it had that tone like an Edge of Spider-Verse issue 4, but I'm noticing an overall problem with the ordering of certain story beats to the point where I couldn't fully enjoy stories that I did like. The way it framed Grayson to be the villain in Heartless's story was a unique perspective, but Taylor had gone from 0 to 100 with how important this guy is, and it feels forced, and as if Blockbuster shouldn't have been killed so early. The second story was cute, although a bit predictable, as Dick and Barbara go on a date night leaving Haley in the apartment alone, only for the couple's night to descend into chaos and needing Nightwing to save the day. I can't lie, this did remind me a lot of the dog issue from Hawkeye, so those comparisons didn't stop coming, but it was daft and I'll never complain about more dog stories in comics. The final story in the annual was pretty much just a scene between Dick and John, but it was probably my favourite of the three. It felt like an evolution of their earlier crossover, but with the benefit of Jay being nowhere in sight. Fuck that guy. As John confides within Dick after he went too far with his powers. There's a flashback to when Batman trained Robin to emphasise that following the lessons of our mentors to a T isn't always the right approach. We can still respect what they've done for us without needing to pass that same hurt onto the next generation. You know, sins of the father and all that crap. I got a kick out of how Taylor respected Nightwing's stance in situations like this, rather than turning to instant hero worship just because Batman's on the page. Unfortunately, the annual works as a palate cleanser, and allows the main series to swiftly get back to what worked. With the new commissioner in Bludhaven, the prisons quickly fill up, with the criminals who were previously above the law. However, this means Tony Zuko's let out early, and his first visit is to his daughter Melinda, the very person who can help him rule Bludhaven once again. It's got some of that wackiness from before, with Zuko trying to steal the Eye of Kondak from some kind of pirate army, and then the whole thing is wrapped up again really quickly in one issue. It's crazy how you can have too much of a good thing with this run, because I wanted more of issue 87 because of how great the pace was and wrapped everything up as a one and done, but now that it was happening pretty much every issue, I wanted more. Don't get me wrong, I'm glad the series ain't dragging, but now it's starting to feel like speed dating, and plots don't go beyond the surface. To give it credit, Taylor does always find a way to make each brief storyline bleed into the next, and tie it back into the characters. So the whole thing with Zuko and Melinda being reminded once again how morally bankrupt he is, leads to her changing her surname to Grayson Lynn, and deepening her connection with her brother. Sure, I never got the will she betray Nightwing storyline that I was eager for, but in a way, this is better. And for as much as I'm moaning me tits off about plots not leaving the gate, each passing issue was slowly bringing the bigger picture together. It feels natural, with just a subtle tease that Heartless is taking out low-level rivals in Bludhaven so that he can take over. I like how this was unfolding. It avoided being in your face and didn't overstay its welcome, all of which culminated with issue 100. I've made it no secret that most double-sized issues could have had the exact same page count, but this, combined with the signature pace, used it so well that I barely noticed it was extended. If anything, I thought the fight in this could have been longer. After all the build-up, Heartless orchestrates a breakout at Bludhaven Private Prison, the one that was formerly ran by Blockbuster and riddled in controversy. All of the villains that Nightwing helped to put behind bars like Elephant Man, which surely must be some kind of copyright issue, KG Beast and Tony Zuko, who may have taken the award from the Joker for the shortest stay in a DC prison. The prisoners causing chaos in the streets was really fun, and I like seeing a variety of different artists come in and give us a brief history of Dick's transformation over the years. The whole issue epitomizes a theme I always seem to stumble on in these deep dives: change. And the more I thought about it, the more I realised that Dick is one of the most storied characters in all of DC. We've pretty much seen his whole life unfold as it happened, which is why there are so many different layers to him, to the point where I have to compartmentalise them. It's because of this history that we get such unique resolutions to conflicts. The reason why the riot in Bludhaven wasn't longer is because Dick offers the prisoners the chance to lose the masks, abandon Heartless, and start on a different path. Sure, they don't all agree, but some do. It highlights the importance of hope and change. Everything can change, especially if it has to. Dick's relationship with Bruce hasn't always been the smoothest. The two have butted heads, but that needed to change so that they could be like a family. His relationship to Barbara has to change so that they can see each other as partners in every sense, and help each other to improve Bludhaven. And Bludhaven has to change. The story opened with Dick speaking with Bruce at Alfred's grave, much like when Grayson wanted to launch the Pennyworth Foundation, but now they need his help. Apparently, the Justice League's disbanded, And I'm just going to take Batman's word for it because I haven't been reading anything alongside this, and, you know, it's Batman, I kind of have to trust him. But the Trinity want Dick to rise up in the wake of this, and lead his own team of Titans to fill the gap, with Grayson accepting and choosing to change the Bludhaven prison into the new home for the team. And you know what, it works with this theme of change and the different aspects of Nightwing. He's not just a sidekick anymore or the guy fighting to get out of his mentor's shadow. He is his own man and has been for a while, but is finally getting that recognition from the heroes he used to look up to. Finally, he has his seat at the table. It's just that the seat is more of a symbol, and instead the run pivots back into this weird mystical angle that I wasn't keen to get back to. This time it isn't just a one-off story, but it's instead a tactical move by Taylor so that he could soft launch his separate Titans series. And as a result, the main Nightwing title becomes more of an ensemble book. It very much feels like a complete shift in gears, even if the setup did come from the Heartless plot, because everything with this Neron story feels like the black sheep of the series. And this title technically has all the Dick Grayson stuff. These issues after 100 also have a backup story that wasn't written by Taylor, and honestly, it felt like they were going nowhere, so I ditched them off after the first few. But maybe that's why the first omnibus of this run only goes up to issue 100, because there's such a shift after. And if you wanted to pick up that book or any others and support the channel at the same time, you can get them from the channel sponsors. If you're in the EU, we've got Comics Bugle, and for everyone else, we've got Organic Price Books. They've got great packaging, fast shipping, and amazing customer services, and if you use code WOOFWOOF, you'll get $2 off your order. And if you're ordering 3 or more books and you want them to be delivered together, make sure you use code WOOFWOOF, ship it together for 5% off your entire order. Don't worry, you can just copy and paste them from the description down below, and you can use these codes as many times as you like. And Comics Bugle have been a huge support to this channel over the last few years, and they can be to you as well, because if you use code WOOFWOOF, you'll get 3% off all items that aren't already in a sale, along with getting membership points. So get your orders in. So since Olivia's soul wasn't reclaimed by Neron the first time, he takes a more subtle approach to get his side of the deal. He recruits the Grinning Man, who can disguise themselves as anyone, but still will always retain that toothy grin of theirs. Meanwhile, the kid who does not speak anything like a real kid has been hiding and training with Raven. There is a lot of, ooh, who might be the Grinning Man out of this bunch going on, because the art manages to disguise pretty much everyone's face. But what Travis Moore can't disguise is that this book just doesn't feel the same when Bruno's not on it. It's bizarre too, because the style isn't a million miles away, but it's just missing that oomph that Redondo has. The line work may have similarities, but it feels very cookie cutter, and they never tries to show us something that we haven't seen already. Yet it seemed Taylor was comfortable picking that aspect up, as once again Dick learns about the deal with Neron, and having fought the Grinning Man and realised that he will keep coming until the deal's complete, he enlists the help of his fellow Titans to hatch a hell heist to find the contract. This leads to way more office time than he expected, but also led to Neron offering Dick a chance to experience what life would be like with the powers of the heroes that he's always looked up to. Despite not being a big fan of the non-street level plot, this is a fun concept, but one that I think would have been better suited in an annual. I was quite a fan of Dick trying to get the contract with the Devil voided on a technicality, because that's something I'd expect to see in a Daredevil comic, and I didn't realise it at first, but tying it into that theme of change and perception, this concept may be one of the most important ones to the story as a whole. With just 2 hours to use his powers and revel in the badass mythical suit that he's being given, he manages to clear up all of the mess that's been caused by Neron, and even has time to give John and Wally a very literal run for the money. It was nice, and the clear highlight of this jarring arc, and managed to connect it back to that message I'd felt from the beginning. Dick Grayson is enough. You can give him powers, a new suit, a new name, but who he is at his core is the same, and no amount of changes will make him better than the man that we already have. I couldn't care less about Olivia, but the first thing that he did was save her, and make easy work of it, but even without powers, he'd have done the same. When push comes to shove and anyone asks him to hand over Olivia for a lifetime of powers, there's no way that he'd accept. I would have, without hesitation, but that's probably why I don't have a comic series. But what this story proved is that as long as we have the man, the hero, and the heart, then that's enough. It is just a shame that it didn't seem to be enough for Taylor. So I spoke earlier about the Titan series that Tom launched alongside this, but when you get to the final page of this arc, there's not much of a resolution. And I was met with a to be continued in Titans issue 1, which felt cheap. Much like the Batgirl's plug and fee estate, I can't shake the feeling that this one was paused to give promotion to a different title. The Titans had already been quite involved with Nightwing during the Blockbuster and Heartless storylines, so why not soft launch their book through that and not derail the ongoing plot of Nightwing? Because between that, issue 100, and this Olivia storyline, I feel this Titans book has been stealth launched 3 times already. I'm not even saying this plot was bad, it just didn't do much. Maybe I'd feel different if I reviewed the Titans run somewhere down the line. But it's very typical that whilst I was reading this, Taylor was still writing Titans, and I thought he was going to long after he finished Nightwing. But then while scripting this, I learned that he left that title after issue 15. Maybe next time. It's a shame too, because when this started, it was fun arc after fun arc with the occasional misstep, whereas now, just before it would start running to the finish line, it was the other way around. Case in point, the fantastic issue that took place entirely through the eyes of Grayson, that just so happened to be a one-off between 2 lackluster arcs. It just had that pace that the early issues did. From the start, it wastes no time when Melinda calling Dick about a biological weapon that's about to be unleashed in Bludhaven. Now I'll be real, I thought this was the exact same plot as season 3 of 24 but with Nightwing, but I really missed 24 so I'm okay with it. It turns out Shelton Lyle's connected to the plot, which did help this issue feel pivotal to the main run, especially after the focus had been more on setting up the Titans. But for some reason, Taylor refuses to let us connect the dots. The second that Lyle appears, there's this editor's box telling us that he's heartless, but Dick doesn't know that. And considering that the annual was a bit earlier than this, it would have been nice to connect those dots for myself, since Dick was already narrating that he remembered the guy back when he was a bully. Even a dumb reader like me would have figured it out. That still doesn't take away from the issue overall, and it reminded me a lot of what I enjoyed early on, and that there was still gas left in the tank. Redondo just immediately reminded me why he was the best at illustrating this title, and Taylor reinforced how Dick and Barbara are the strongest thread throughout this whole thing. And just like when they were transporting Maroni, I enjoyed how Babs is horny pretty much the whole issue, even with the looming threat of a biological weapon. But what does Dick have that's more important than saving the city? I'll be back in a minute.
2 seconds later.
At least that's out of my system and there's nothing now that can tempt... For God's sake! Okay, now I'm not against a Dick Grayson pirate adventure, but it felt odd when it made a brief appearance during the Zuko storyline, and I was perfectly fine not returning to the stuff with the quartermaster and the hold. The tone just doesn't gel with everything that was going on in Bludhaven. Throw in another connection to Dick Grayson, and I'm surprised that I didn't dislike this. It's a testament to Taylor's writing, because the arc opens with a flashback to Rick receiving a package from one of his carnival friends that he needs stowed in the hold. Fortunately, his fling B knows the quartermaster, but unfortunately, in the present day, Heartless is on hand to help Zuko break into the hold. They go on a robbery murder spree only to see that the hold has disappeared. This is where Nightwing steps in to investigate who is behind this, but it leads him to a ship where the captain is B. We get a swashbuckling adventure with a traitor lurking amongst the crew. Dick and Bab's relationship is tested, and Grayson hits a mental hurdle that prevents his ability to leap. That last one's a strange point that I'll speak about more in part 4, but I guess overall this arc was fine if I treat it as a standalone thing, rather than try to place it in the grand scheme of the story. In a way though, this one was good at helping me recognise what I like in an arc. Is it about nailing a big overarching narrative with perfect timings, or do I just want to be entertained? Because if it is the latter, then this pirate storyline did that. The mystery was fun, the tension was handled well, it gave me something I hadn't seen before, and the action was as good as it had been throughout the series. And even though it may have only had a brief appearance from Heartless, it still worked in building the image of the man and the heart. Because when the job is complete and Rick's package is reclaimed, it's revealed to be a video of the Flying Graysons, except it's from the day they were killed, and shows for the first time in conclusive evidence that Zuko sabotaged their equipment. Now, I quite enjoyed this because it felt like for the first time Rick was helping Dick, whilst also finding a way to make this pirate side mission connect back to the main story. It's something Tom's done well this entire time, and also touched once again on the theme of family. But that's not what takes priority following this, because the conclusion of this arc is followed by a prologue to Beast World. This was a Titan-centric event that was released in 6 issues between November 2023 and January 2024, and revolves around people being turned into animals because of Beast Boy. I'm gonna be honest, I knew so little about this whilst reading Nightwing that I only have one note about this storyline. Was Beast World supposed to be something more? The prologue was nearly as long as the story. Yep, Do you remember earlier when I said I wouldn't just be making one mistake in this video? Well, this is the big one. I thought about trying to style it out and pretend I knew this event was here, but I deliberately skipped it like I did with Fear State. But Taylor wrote Beast World, so that excuse wouldn't fly. Then I thought about lying and pretending it was a deliberate omission for an eventual Titans review where it would fit better. But in a review where Dick has been such a nice guy throughout, I didn't want to lie. So perhaps I could have connected some of the dots from the Beast World tie-in issues of Nightwing, and close this part with a poignant, melodramatic line, but what more is there to say besides, I'm a dumbass? So where do you take a story that's been soaring high for the majority of the time? Inevitably, there has to be a fall. But Taylor's Nightwing had been in this state of limbo, where the main plots had been pushed into the background for a while now, despite feeling like they were progressing naturally before this. So to guide it to the finish line, there was a desperate need to refocus, which leaves the series at risk of rushing the key final moments or rehashing what we've already seen. That's why the smart approach of a soft realignment takes place, in the form of Heartless carrying on his work in Gotham City. Batman arrives on the scene, but is already too late, with only a child left on to watch as a witness, just like Bruce had to in Crime Alley, and how Dick did with the Flying Graysons. Possibly moving Heartless to a different city was a great way of throwing him headfirst back into the series, without it being too bumpy of a transition from all the Neron, Pirate and Beast World issues. But it did feel wrong having Batman's narration in a Nightwing book. Somehow, it felt like I was invading his privacy. Bruce calls Dick in for a team up, and the mere mention of Heartless has him speeding over to Gotham. And I like the detective work between the two. Sure, Batman has the edge, but Dick is still a valued accomplice, and his softer nature means he can get through to the orphan kid better than the Dark Knight can, which is the only way the duo discovered that they're dealing with an imposter. But I'm not sure if maybe I'm a great detective, or it was just really badly signposted, but I immediately suspected the kid's creepy uncle. From the second he appeared, I said nonce, but then once Dick reveals his findings, I said, fake Heartless. And I'm the great detective that didn't even realise the Beast World issues were connected to an event that was written by the same writer. But despite enjoying this, there was something that Taylor often did that could spoil his own climax. Flashbacks had been used a lot in this series, and they were written well, but whatever the point of the scene was, would always be the lesson that was learned by the end of the current story. So if you get given a flashback that shows Alfred saying that what they do without the masks is important, then present day Dick will open up a foundation in Alfred's memory. You got one that has a young Barbara taking Dick out on patrol to get over the nerves, while now in the present, he can return the favour. So when the issue opens with Batman teaching a young Dick to not take his anger out on others, which of these do you think will be the ending? Go on, take a guess. Yeah, it might seem obvious, but it's also technically the first option, so it's just me who lost out. But it did give us a really wholesome conversation between Batman and Beast Boy, which did a lot for the issue even without reading Beast World. And especially as this is the penultimate story before the concluding arc, Taylor did everything that was needed to bring the excitement back, and also push Dick's relationship with Bruce to the forefront, which becomes far more pivotal for the ending. And that ending comes with Fallen Grayson. There is somewhat of a prelude issue, but it's honestly just page after page of people telling Dick how great he is. I'm being serious. Don't get me wrong, the dude is great, but I haven't seen glazing this strong since Bo Nickel entered the UFC. The only person who's not wedging the tongue between Dick's perfect cheeks is Heartless, who's decided that now is the perfect time to take everything from Grayson. Then we're in the snowy mountains. It's 2 weeks in the future. Dick is bearded and remembering the first time he fell as a child. And for some inexplicable reason, he points out to Haley that he needs to rest more because she has one more leg than him. I get it's in jest, but based on pure statistics, she's operating with 75% of her intended legs, whereas you have 100% of yours, and the cardio of a lifetime athlete / vigilante. But you know what? I was excited for this. Fallen Grayson was the reason I jumped back into this series, and having read the whole run, this ending was coming at the right time. There'd been a lot I loved in this series, especially in the first half, but as time had gone on, the focus had slowly been drifting, and more stories had cropped up that weren't about Grayson or Bludhaven, which is where the run had been at its weakest. The storyline with Heartless had been simmering in the background for long enough now as well, so to have that front and centre in the climax to this run excited me, and made me believe that this could stick the landing. Especially since Taylor had done a great job with that in All New Wolverine. So when we cut back to the present day, Heartless has assembled a collection of the villains that he's helped or threatened in the past, and blackmails them into helping him take down Dick. Meanwhile, Nightwing's already battling his own insecurities, since his anxiety over leaping has taken away one of his biggest advantages as a vigilante. and he's also causing mistakes. There's one thief he pursues on foot and takes down violently that was just trying to steal some food for his family, which was very similar to the kids he chased down in the first few issues that turned out to be homeless, and also contradicts what Dick preached in the previous story about not letting his anger consume him and hurt others. But at least it's not all just repeated lessons, except when it comes to this fear of jumping. This as an idea is great and delves into who Dick is, but did he not overcome this exact same thing during the pirate arc when B was drowning? Is it only in worst case scenarios that he can overcome this fear? Considering how integral this is tied to the death of his parents, and a fear that has been alluded to since part 1, and is later revealed to be because he was poisoned in the POV issue, which really should have worn off by now. I couldn't help but feel like I'd already seen this thread complete, but now I'm supposed to act like it's a massive crisis? But apparently this is worse currently, as Dick is still in Gotham, so he has to be a vigilante in his old stomping ground. But he needs to be there as a banquet is being thrown for the Alfred Pennyworth Foundation, so that the glazing of the previous issue can continue. At least the reporters aren't in on it, asking questions about blood money and Dick's connection to Blockbuster. And when he thinks things couldn't get worse, the whole building descends into chaos. Shelton Lyle had been lurking in the crowd and had planned the whole thing. You know what? This was a really fun plan to watch unfold, and see how Heartless had lined up the dominoes to fall at the right time and in a way that Dick couldn't predict. So the reporters were a distraction so that Lyle could set the fire alarm off. He guilt trips Dick into evacuating an empty room so that he can be gassed unconscious and delivered to Tony Zuko. It's at that point everyone discovers Dick is Nightwing, and Zuko had one of the funniest lines of the series. But for Lyle, it only strengthens his plan to destroy Dick, as he can frame Grayson for all the crimes committed by Heartless. Although I couldn't help but notice how lucky he got in one aspect of this plan that he had set up, but miraculously came back at the right time: the fear of leaping. Because when the GCPD ambushed Dick on a rooftop, heart-stealing gun in hand and everything, the only thing that stops him from getting away is when he gets to the edge of the building. If the fear hadn't returned, he wouldn't have been caught and identified. It might seem like I'm banging on about a very minor point, but all that needed to happen for this to have an impact was to not have the scene with B drowning. And I have to bang on about it because it's the crux of the entire final arc, and there are so many coincidences because of it. Great example: Dick's arrested, handcuffed to a hospital bed, and up to his teeth on morphine with 6 officers watching his every move. We see him break free of the handcuffs, but with such subtle force that none of the officers notice, and then the next time we see Dick, he's walking into Barbara's living room. How did he escape the hospital? I'd even take a daft answer over the nothing one that we got. Was he on the ground floor? Did the morphine also help him overcome his recently resurrected fear of leaping? But then how would he have been able to outrun all of the officers and everyone that would have been waiting outside? Why did no one think to see if he went to Barbara's place? You see, Tom, you see what happens when you don't give me the slightest explanation? This has been keeping me awake for 3 days now. But at least Barbara can give him the news that his blood was infected with a toxin that's similar to that of Scarecrow's, which is why this fear originally manifested, but also that there are only small traces in his system, so it's likely to be a mental hurdle, which I assume was the case anyway. But the more important matter is clearing Dick's name, and apparently there are only 2 routes they could go down. First up is to reveal himself as Nightwing, and to corroborate this, pretty much the entire Bat family agreed to do the same, which may be the most outlandish solution I can imagine, but I'd love to see it. I just can't imagine it. Like, we're told even Jason's on board. That dude would definitely be immediately put on trial for multiple murders. Is that really the best guy to help prove Dick's innocence? So that leaves him with no other choice but to sneak his way out of Bludhaven and travel halfway across the world with Haley to the remote temple where Deadman is. Okay, now I can't shut up the nagging part of my brain that's telling me that fleeing the city whilst being framed for multiple crimes is possibly the dumbest thing that Dick could do, and plays right into Lyle's hand, but this is a great setup that I really didn't see coming. I only really know his character from the Neil Adams run and what I saw of him in Justice League Dark, but he was great in this. And it was one of those dynamics where it had me like, why isn't he in more titles with Nightwing? Because if I'm talking about the 3 areas of Dick Grayson, he helps him to explore all 3. His ability to leap without fear, both literally and figuratively, is the thing that connects the 3. He needs to leap to be Nightwing, and that boldness to venture into uncharted territory is part of what makes him a man. And losing this ability weakens his connection to the heart, because it's what he remembers most of his parents and his childhood before Zuko took it from him. Leaping is essential to it all, so Boston Brand is the perfect character to help bring it back. I just wish he'd been in this more. I'm not even asking for him to be in the run overall, but just more so in this arc, because I counted the number of pages that he's in, and it's 10, with 2 of them being a flashback. Take out the 2 pages that introduced him in the present day, and we're talking about a crippling fear of leaping that Deadman got Dick over in 6 pages. 6! More time was spent on Olivia, and I still can't figure out what she added to the run. This was supposed to be the climax, and if it hadn't already had the wind taken out of it when Dick already overcame the fear for B, then this made it seem like Dick could have spoken to pretty much anyone and been okay. It's such a disappointment too, because for the 8 pages that we got to see him, he was witty, enigmatic, calling out how all the tropes were being ignored, and added a lot of gravitas from his first appearance, probably because he had no time to waste. And what this boils down to is that Full and Grayson desperately needed more time. It's probably my biggest problem with this run, that it was so eager to be action-packed, they blitzed past some of the more interesting elements. They could have sacked off the Olivia arc and the B arc, and given this twice as many issues so that Heartless takes over Grayson's life in more than one issue. The journey to Nanda Parbat could have and should have been more arduous, to illustrate the lengths that Grayson went to for answers. Deadman's lessons needed to be fleshed out so that it doesn't feel like Dick immediately got the solution he was looking for, and more time definitely would have benefited the most iconic part of this ending, Bruce filling in as Nightwing. Now yeah, how in the fuck did Bruce fit into that suit when they're clearly not the same size? Or has he just always had a Nightwing suit in his size lying around in case of a situation like this? This comes about as Heartless blackmails the Titans into leaving Bludhaven, but invites Nightwing to stay as his sleeper agents threaten the city. With Dick out of town and Bruce acknowledging the importance of a symbol, he ditches the cowl and takes to the rooftops. But we only get one scene of Bruce as Nightwing before Dick comes back. How is this not at least a few issues? Highlight the biggest differences between the two in the same way that Morrison did in Batman and Robin, and truly put the stamp on why Bludhaven needs Nightwing rather than just saying it. There didn't seem to be any struggle for Bruce or even a comment from the city on how he's changed. He even told Dick that he quipped twice, and I want to know what those quips would be. The only one I can think of is, I may not be Dick, but you're still gonna take a pounding. Despite the energy and excitement that the story gave with all of this potential, there was still a sense that it was in a rush to get to the finish line, only further complicated by the revelation that Zuko had originally planned to kill Dick on the day that his parents died. It's odd, normally this type of change to a character's origin can feel like too big of a retcon, yet that's not the case here. It wouldn't change the journey he's had if he knew this when he was a kid, in the same way that Melinda being his half-sister didn't. But I do enjoy how Taylor's able to add these changes to the lore, but without it being so detrimental that it overshadows the story itself. Ironically though, it doesn't factor that much into the story that it's revealed in, as Zuko is more of a background character and just a pawn in the finale, because the issue starts with Heartless making a public threat that he's gonna level Haven, which causes the Bat family to frantically search for Lyle to stop him in time, whereas Dick takes a different approach and simply walks right up to him when he appears at Haven. And honestly, with how public Heartless has been up until now, whilst also claiming to be Dick Grayson, I don't get why he didn't do this earlier, or why people didn't notice that Heartless clearly has blonde hair now. But this is where we see Dick as his true self and at his best, where the Nightwing spirit is there by confronting his enemy head on. The man is there because he wants the world to see him as Dick Grayson, but the heart is at the centre of it because it's all to protect what he loves. When I first read this issue, I thought that the final confrontation happening at the same park that the battle for the heart of Bludhaven mostly happened in was a bit of a wet flannel, but as a way of putting the cap on this chapter of Dick's life, it does make the most sense, even if it doesn't have a grand level of spectacle for a run of this length. From the start, Taylor's been showing us why Dick Grayson's enough. Not Nightwing, but Dick. So to have him take his stand with no suit or gadgets, and without a voice guiding his moves, is the perfect way of proving that Dick is enough. It's telling us that the man and the heart that guides him will always be essential to the hero, and can't be forgotten about in pursuit of gimmicks to boost sales. And this was essential in turning the tide of the battle, as Heartless's men rebel because he never believed in him, whereas Dick can rally the people. It meant that they could just cut to a more personal battle rather than needing to see the two factions go up against each other. The on-foot chase was fun to watch, even if I have to imagine that someone must have seen Dick change into Nightwing, and all the work to overcome his fear of leaping came in handy, as Heartless jumps off one bridge and think that that's going to be the foil, but Dick now has the courage to follow him. And that's the only time since his return from seeing Deadman where he's needed to jump off something. The scene that follows is a bit too chaotic if I'm honest. Dick is fighting Heartless, the butler gets involved, Zuko is back and everyone wants to fight him, Haley's there but at least she's got plot armor because she's a doctor. can't remember the last time I gasped so loud at a page in a comic. I didn't even register at first that Haley had been shot when she tried to save Dick from the butler. And I know the final page exists where she's sitting on the crane with Dick and Barbara, but I don't know if that's canon because the dog very much looked dead up until that point and didn't appear in the final scene, so I just thought that was a pin-up so that the creators could close a title. Honestly, nothing else really matters after this moment. It felt like Haley died, and that's harder to see than if another Robin had been killed. After this, Zuko's murdered in front of Dick, but somehow it doesn't matter. The book itself doesn't focus on it that much. It's as if Taylor's emphasizing how living in the past and pursuing revenge will only make us miss out on what we have in the here and now, which also ties into the fight between Dick and Lyle. Heartless isn't fighting for anything worth fighting for, whereas Nightwing is, so to emphasize that Shelton won't be remembered is the most apt punishment that he can be dealt. It's following that message that Dick's embodied since the first issue, that being a good person is what matters. Even if Dick's been on the nose about it in his actions, that's better than bringing nothing but hurt into the world. He just wants to leave his home better than the way he found it, using whichever angle works best. And what it's been boiling down to this entire time is the heart going up against the heartless. That's why, even though this last issue does feel massively rushed, it still does a good job of resolving all the major threads. The scene with Dick visiting his parents' grave with his half-sister and accepting that his life hasn't always been straightforward, but acknowledging that he must stay true to who he is, ties back into the beginning with Dick trying to understand life in the wake of loss. The Pennyworth blue flower was a nice touch too, in giving a lesson on the importance of preservation and memory. I said earlier about change, but it's also important to remember that although anything can change, it doesn't always need to. The flower didn't need to be changed or replaced because that would ruin what it is, in the same way that Dick Grayson was already enough. There are so many great and different aspects to him already that there's no need to reinvent his entire sense of self, but just tell a great story with the character that we have already, and that is exactly what Taylor gave us here. A lesson in consistency. It's a decent sized run that puts Dick front and centre and reminds us that there is already enough there. I can sit here and nitpick why this one isn't perfect and complain about which storylines took away from the series rather than added to it, and how it reminded me of other series. But you know what, when all's said and done, Tom Taylor stuck the landing. We may live in a world where everything either needs to be the greatest run of all time or the worst, but it's also okay for a run to just be a good time, explore a fan favourite character, and remind us what works. And that's this. This works, and Dick Grayson is enough.